Live. Thanks everyone for joining today. Here with Michael Brown from RentButter. Couple lines of connections here. How we got connected. So met Chief Marketing Officer Arun at, I believe it was OpTech, and then I don't know if were you at OpTech, Michael?
I was not.
You were not there. And Arun was like, I think you should chat with Michael. And then we got connected later on at TAA, and then we were trying to get our calendars together. And so thrilled to finally. And then we had our pre-call. We almost could have had that. Could have been a show right then and there.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Outstanding, everybody, for joining today. Looking forward to the call today. Michael's the CEO or the sales leader at RentButter, and as we talk about all the time around the Getting to Hell Yes conversation, we're constantly seeking to find more efficient ways of serving our customers and our prospects in our market. And one of the things that gets we can spend a lot of money and time and effort and energy, hope and wishes in terms of trying to persuade people to do things they don't necessarily are prioritizing. And the concept of Hell Yes is that maybe we can find people that are actually seeking to solve problems. And how can we identify those people? How can we kind of align with those people? How can we make it very simple to buy, easy to get started, so they can start addressing the problems they're seeking to solve? The challenge with that is that not everyone expresses their problems in the same way. And so while you can have this consumer-based marketing where you're telling people what to buy, telling people how to look, that doesn't necessarily fit in B2B, right? In B2B, you got to find people that are actively seeking problems. And it's interesting, I had a sales call just this morning, and it was like, what have you tried? How have you tried to solve this today? And why are you looking at tech? And I said, well, we've tried to throw the people at the problem. We tried to throw vendors at the problem. And both those options didn't work out. And so now we're looking at tech. And so it's interesting to hear people talk about the things that they've tried and how they get to where they want to go. And that helps bring them down the buyer's journey into that Hell Yes kind of slot where they're seeking to actively find a solution for their problems. As always, this is brought to you by RCX. RCX is AI remote maintenance software, help you do remote troubleshooting, automate your inspections, simplify your maintenance experience so you can really get to a standardized operations model and make life better for your people, make life better for your residents, and ultimately drive a higher NOI or maybe even a more attainable budget for your organization. Folks listening, you are welcome to ask questions along the way. We always love to have that kind of engagement. It makes it a lot more fun. And hey, sometimes you get to stump us live on the show. And then afterwards, for everybody else that's listening, there's always a podcast and there's always a blog post and that sort of thing. So if you have any insights in there, or you want to engage, we'd love to get that in kind of engagement. So as always, hand it over to our guest, Michael. Thanks for joining us today. Just a little bit about yourself. What's the problem that RentButter solves? And let's talk about Hell Yes.
All right, excellent. Glad to be here today. Looking forward to the conversation, Guillermo. So the last 25 years in PropTech and SaaS, I've had the privilege of leading sales and revenue teams at CoreLogic, SafeRent, Onsite, and Inhabit. Working with housing providers across the spectrum, multifamily, single family, affordable, and manufactured housing. I've had the unique opportunity to work with some great folks in the industry, great leaders, Monty Jones, Jay Harris, Dennis Smiley, and a long list of other talented folks. I met my lovely wife, Mindy, at Onsite, where I spent 3 great years. Onsite was, of course, acquired by RealPage. I stayed on there about a year before I was asked to join Inhabit, where I led their screening and leasing division for about 5 years. Guillermo, we talked about this, but what I've learned is that no matter the asset type, providers want the same 3 things. They want to move faster, they want to increase revenue, they want to reduce bad debt, and all while providing a positive experience for their renters as well as for their teams that use the platform, right? I had the opportunity to join RentButter 2 years ago, almost exactly. And there are really a few things that attracted me to RentButter. Great leadership and vision from the 2 founders, Chris Rankin and Tom Riley. That was a huge driver. A modernized, I would call data-driven approach to resident screening, and a full verification engine designed to validate things like identity, income, employment. That's a lot. Documents, rent payments. We've got 13 different APIs that are kicking off in real time to do all those things. And thirdly, and this is key, an equitable screening and verification solution that goes far beyond credit data, credit-based data, to find good renters who will pay and stay regardless of their credit scores. This equity-driven approach, it's what brought me here. It's the core value of ours. regardless of credit scores, it's this equity-driven approach it helps operators do a few things. Helps them drive frontline revenue and reduce bad debt. Certainly downstream, it creates fairness in the market. By doing so, it opens housing providers' applicant pool, meaning they can accept more of the applicants that may have otherwise been declined, who have no corresponding increase in bad debt. Again, that affects the revenue downstream. I'd say the other thing is it allows more consumers to obtain affordable housing opportunities. And again, that's a big value for us. We combine a lot of tech under one roof. That really empowers us as a screening company and a verification company to go deeper. We look at financial signals, income stability, fraud detection layers, and that's important. And then deep dive, big emphasis on our deep dive criminal and eviction history. It's also important to note that, Guillermo, we specialize in workforce housing. That is huge for us. And it's one of the toughest markets. Credit scores can be low, but these consumers, they're prioritizing things like their rent. That's a priority for them. So succeeding there has proven our model works everywhere, from luxury to C-class assets. There are, 50 million renters in the U.S., and that number is growing. Renters make up 35% of the U.S. population. And a large percentage of those folks have near prime or subprime credit scores. So getting screening right in that gray area, and that's what I would typically define as consumers scoring between 500 and 680 on their credit scores, that drives revenue, it reduces bad debt, and it helps more people get the housing they deserve. And at the end of the day, Rent Butter is about helping operators, find more residents who will pay and stay while giving renters a fair shot at housing.
And so the initiation with Rent Butter, does it come from, especially when you're looking at focusing on workforce housing, is the initiation for the problem come from the renter side, trying to find where they can, what they can afford, or does it come from the when the lease application is submitted and ultimately they can go and find, where does the problem start? At the renter trying to find housing, or at the manager trying to bring in applicants?
That's a great question, Guillermo. I think it's a little bit of both. I'll say the impetus behind Rent Butter, and maybe this will help provide some perspective. The two co-founders worked at a large REIT in Chicago, and they focused on affordable housing. Really nice assets, but they focused on affordable housing. And there's a lot of competition in the Chicago market. They oftentimes saw, in the two roles, Chris was, he was CTO. Tom ran the legal. He was the attorney, was legal counsel there. And they all too often saw situations where folks were getting declined, disproportionately disadvantaged because of those credit scores. And if you're looking for housing, you're a single mom or single dad, or whatever your situation is, you may be living paycheck to paycheck, but you pay your rent, but you're getting declined because of a credit score when everything else looks good. They're like, that something's wrong here. So they sought to change it, and they built a product that looks at other signals, other markers. So to answer your question, it does, the folks that use our product are looking to find better residents where they know that their applicant pool is limited to near prime or subprime. Well, at the same time, housing providers, they need housing. I'm sorry, renters need housing. They want to live where they want to live, right? Where they can afford to live. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I get it. And so the gap that's in the market is that there's all this unknown in terms of what I can actually, despite the fact that I may be a regular rent payer, all the markers the kind of conventional markers may work against me, despite having, a reputable history of actually being on time and being, et cetera. And so the houses that I have available to me as that kind of renter, the housing that becomes available to me becomes limited. And then for the managing company or the ownership company, for the renters that are available for their pool, that gets smaller as well, because the conventional measurement is a pinch point. That's right. And we're actually exonerating or excluding ourselves from the market on both sides, because the conventional tools use conventional ways of measuring things.
That's right. It's starting to change.
And so it's starting to change. Sure. There's lots of different screening, leasing and screening software that's out there. It's a big problem that people are trying to solve. And in the back end of it, you've got fraud. I mean, between the two different problems to solve of how do I make sure I get the right residents in my units, and then how do I prevent there's a bit of there's an offense and defense conversation to it too as well,
Sure,
right?
sure.
How do I prevent the bad residents from coming in from a fraudulent perspective? And so that was a big conversation in the last couple of years with respect to as we're kind of coming out of the frenzy of rentals and getting everyone into all these units. There wasn't a whole lot of oversight into who was coming in, and then everyone ended up with these bad debts. So you spoke about bad debts, and bad debts is a funny one because it sits there lingering as a kind of like a secret, not secret, but like it's a mess that no one wants to talk about until you got to talk about it.
We always talk about it. It's one of the most important things in the conversation because it's something we can affect. It's like, I mean, it's once you get into that deep discovery, and we're a big believer in uber amounts of discovery. You gain so much from that. Of course, they need to have context around what you do, and we usually open up that way. But understanding what are their problems, and sometimes they don't know that they have a problem. Maybe they think bad debt that's just a part of my business. But you think about the ability to if your debt your bad debt is sitting at 2.5%. and you can affect that by 2 or 3 points, and you've got a large portfolio, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they put a valuation on that it is significant.
Well, particularly since it kind of sneaks up on you, right? It's going to be something that lingers for a bit because it accrues on the balance sheet as a receivable that hasn't been collected yet, and then all of a sudden you've got to convert it into bad debt, at which point it becomes an expense on the P&L. But it's been sitting there lingering as something that didn't actually exist for a long time. Then all of a sudden it pops up, and you're like, "Oh my! Now we've got to treat this. Now this accounting function has become, this bad news, right? And a very uncomfortable conversation if you're a property manager who gets paid uncollected rent, right?
Precisely.
And do you find that like when you guys are in the market, who is your ideal customer profile? Is it? We mentioned workforce housing. Now, beyond that, is it owner-operators or is it fee managers that manage in the workforce side of things?
We do a lot in manufactured housing, but again, we're manufactured housing. That's we work with most of the big players in that space, and it was an underserved market for so many years. The great news is a lot of equity going into that space. We work with companies like Yes and UMH. We work with a lot of the big providers in that space, and it's great. And they're really adopting good tech, including ours, which is great to see. But the consumer is different, right? These are folks, again, they're looking for housing. They oftentimes are buying the asset, but they have, again, not usually less than, not always. Some of them have great credit. A good portion of that population have lower credit scores, and that's we can help that group. So we do a lot of underwriting, not just for the lease piece. So they're leasing the land, they're buying the asset, or they're leasing the asset. We can cover the gamut in terms of the underwriting, whatever type of underwriting that they need, whether it's to buy the unit or to lease the unit and then to lease the land. Are they going to be a safe individual to live within our community? Things like that. Are we going to be able to reduce the fraud? Are they going to stay and pay? Things like that.
Manufactured housing we haven't had a lot of folks in the show talking about it, but I just caught the newswire. Yes is in negotiations with Brookfield for a $10 million acquisition. I think that was the came across biz now. $10 billion. Billion. Yeah. That is insane. For the B, like Billy Goat. Like that's an enormous acquisition when you consider it's largely, it's not on the bullseye of everyone's target. So tell us a bit about manufactured housing and how does that relate to workforce housing?
Well, it's just that again, these are folks that are they want to own their home. It's one of the American dreams, right? To own their own home. And manufactured homes there's some very good communities out there. Yes communities, UMH communities. They spend a huge amount of time and effort and money creating communities, right? Really great communities. And it draws a lot of people to that. They can find housing much cheaper. They can get into it faster. And so there's a big need for it. So we're big proponents of it. Again, there's a lot of equity going into it. and again, our product fits the space extremely well. But you asked a really important question. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Keep going. Keep going.
I'd say the other thing that, like you said, who is your ideal client? And I think what I would really say there is, again, because we work the gamut, but understanding your ideal client really is about the qualification process, right? It's that deep discovery, and that deep discovery allows you to gain the insights that you learn from that discovery that then creates accountability. And when I talk about accountability, it's accountability both internally with your sales team, where you're aligning on your metrics, and then there's accountability with the buyer too, right? Because with the buyer, you're validating the insights that you learn in the discovery process to create action and a path forward. So I think there's a lot to talk about there as well. We spend a lot of time understanding and knowing, hey, whether it's manufactured housing, whether it's single family, whatever the asset type, do we know who the buyer? Do we know who the buyer is? Do we know who the decision maker is? Do we know who the influencer is? Do we have the right people in the room? Do we understand things like timelines? What's the decision matrix? Is there intent to buy? All those things are really, really important, and they could be a little bit different if it's manufactured housing versus, say, multifamily. There's a lot of scrutiny and decisions today. That's a whole other conversation, right? We know that. So, but we spend an inordinate amount of time making sure that we're prepping. We know who we're talking to ahead of time. We understand. We try to understand ahead of time what their needs are. Again, by studying the person that we're going to be actually speaking to, as well as the organization itself. So you understand the makeup of the assets, where they're located. We see, for instance, certain markets where fraud is it's prevalent. And if they've got assets in those markets, let's talk about that. How are they dealing with that? Things like that.
It's been very interesting, like with respect to just like I'll say the hot topics in, whether it be the conference circuit or even just in the newsletters, but like the fraud the fraud topic was something that was certainly a tail end of the leasing conversations.
Yeah.
And you heard all these things about fraud inside, like in the Georgia area, it was particularly high relative to other areas, and and so on and so forth. And so you kind of digging in a little bit of it. And I think that what's interesting about what you guys do with respect to your ideal customer profile, that affordable and workforce level, is that like there's a certain amount of, obviously there's a tremendous amount of, like if you look at the bell curve of who's out there for rentability, there's a lot of potential renters in that space. It's probably maybe even more than on the higher end of it all, right? Now and so, but we need to figure out how to de-risk that transaction in a way that we can, be comfortable with the two things, like de-risk the rent that we're seeking to lock in. And then the second thing, make sure we create it in an equitable context so that we can be on site with affordable housing and those things. But additionally, like just be fair about who we want to have in our communities, because there has to be some sort of correlation between those that have consistency around their payability, and then the communities that you're building, especially when you're talking about a community versus a unit inside a multifamily unit. And so do you find that there is not only do you have correlation around being able to retain that rent, on the back end of it, does the needle move with respect to retention within the entire community when they have this kind of system in place? Like, does that make people want to stay longer because there are people like me in this community?
Absolutely. I'd say part of the underwriting is, what you can capture there is, again, with statistics is, based on the metrics that you're seeing, is their near-term financial status, are they trending the right way? Regardless of that credit score, they might have a near prime credit score, but they're trending the right way. They're paying all their bills on time, certainly the ones that matter. Those types of individuals, again, we can capture that. We can provide those insights to the operator. Those folks tend to be more elastic, meaning they can take on higher payments over time, and they're also going to stay longer. We know that definitively. right? But if you're also, it's a part of that is you're building good communities, so they want to stay longer. And if they're a buyer, if they own the home and it's a good community, then yeah, they're far more elastic. They're more likely to stay. So I think there are a number of components that fit into that. But certainly that's part of it.
That's very cool. And so when you guys are out there looking to find people, like, we talked about already the customer profile. What are they, what's the problem they're seeking to solve? How do they articulate it? Is it, because the solution set that you guys provide may not be aligned with how they're exactly starting to articulate their pain. So what are they, I say, what are they typing into Google? What are they complaining about to at the water cooler? What's causing them grief or getting in front of them hitting their goals?
So I'd say, yeah, it's a great question. Oftentimes it's like, so their selection criteria that they have, whatever that may be, and there's usually, and you see that in just about every sector, but certainly in manufactured housing, they've got, as part of their selection criteria, they've got credit standards, they've got credit limits. And sometimes though, when you look at their, whatever that band is, whatever their low score is and their high score is, meaning the low score, anything below it, they're going to be declined. Anything beyond, above it, they would be approved with the standard deposit or whatever that looks like. But what are you doing with the folks in the middle, right? And then for those folks that have been declined, are there missed opportunities there? And once you start having that conversation, that's where we spend a lot of our time, is missed opportunities. So for instance, we did a study on 500,000 homes. It's a recent study, 500,000 homes. And for those 500,000 homes, they all had an eviction. So our goal was to understand, for that large subset, 500,000, what were the leading indicators that led to that eviction? And so we did the study. Of course, we analyzed it. Coming out of the study, using regression analysis and best statistical tools in the market, we identified those leading indicators that would be indicative of an eviction occurring. So in our reporting that we provide to our end user, we're giving them signals on those high-ranking indicators of risk. So somebody could have a lower credit score, say in the low 500s, but they don't have these risk factors and they're trending in the right way. You're missing opportunities right there that we could capture for you. We can do this after the fact. We can run soft hits on these folks. Like, we could take their existing applicant or people that they processed, rerun them under a soft profile, and give them some metrics on, aggregate the data, give them metrics on, here's where your missed opportunities, right? And what was the revenue impact there? And again, we also see that for those missed opportunities, the folks that are scoring here also are ones that stay and they pay and they live longer, right? So there's a lot that we can uncover there just through the data, better metrics. And that, I think, is a huge differentiator for us.
How do you find, like, the conversation? So for starters, I'm thrilled that you use the word leading indicators, because I just find that is something that is often overlooked when we come into transactional type roles, because they're looking to close that lease and get paid. Particularly when you've got a compensation model at that leasing level that says, hey, the more we get approved, the more you're in the back end. It just goes back to, flashback to the mortgage crisis of 08, 09, right?
Sure.
So how do you begin to have those conversations how does that resonate with that level who's motivated to get a closed lease and paid, this month, this week on a closed lease? How do you begin to influence their motivations when you've got something like a leading indicator, which is in my world, it's like, those are curl my toes words, but for a lot of people, those are like scary words, because it's like things that may or may not happen. But how do you begin to associate leading indicators with the decision-making process of that frontline leasing worker? Like, how do they gain accountability to that outcome? Because I get paid for closing leases.
Yeah, there's a conflict of interest there. That starts, you're having those conversations at the corporate level, meaning what we would typically do is set that selection criteria at the corporate level, and that's managed and controlled at the corporate level. and that's assimilated down to the asset types. And we can set those, that matrix, that selection criteria by property, right? So because there's going to be nuances. You could have properties literally with a mile within each other that have very different selection criteria for a number of reasons, right? But the people are on site. We know there's a conflict of interest between a lease and that, the money that it could impact them, which, it's all important. But I'd also say that it's the way those management companies are training those individuals, because ultimately, if they're approving someone that has these markers of risk, then they're going to be a problem in the future. So I think there's some underlying training that typically we see is happening between corporate and the on-site folks. But yes, to answer your question, the way that's managed is we spend a lot amount of time on setting that selection criteria by region, by property. We can really get into the weeds, and we're setting that for all types of parameters. We set it for criminal, we set it for eviction data, we set it on credit, we set it on some of the behavior analytics that we're modeling, and we set that up, and they can't touch, the on-site folks don't touch that. And then there's usually they've got folks in the corporate office that are managing that, policing that on a regular basis, like daily.
I think what's interesting that you brought up there is that, like, it feels like it's inappropriate to have, and I don't mean that, it's ineffective. It's ineffective to have a standardized policy for go, no go at the corporate level, when, to your point, the data indicates that it's actually at the site level that you can actually have, there are dials to turn at the site level that can indicate what is acceptable risk tolerance versus something that's like like you mentioned earlier, like anyone who's above or below, 500 is no, or below 600 is a no go. Then that doesn't necessarily, that doesn't correlate with rentability or payability at the site level, because at the site level there's more markers to consider. Is that true?
That's very fair. That's very fair. So as part of that process, when we do an onboarding with a client, say manufactured housing or multifamily, whatever it is, we typically want to include a property level member, usually the manager, so that they have a say in what they believe are the important selection criteria that we should be looking at. Because again, their interest is in the assets, the community as well, also, right? So leasing agents that there may need to be some more control over. But again, if you have good training, even that's typically dealt with in the right way. So we want to make sure, number one, it gets buy-in, right? You want the property to have a say in that selection criteria, and typically they would. And again, we can control that down to the property level. So we're very concerned about making sure that as we roll this out for any portfolio, that the properties have buy-in to the product, they're comfortable with it, they believe in it, and being involved in that very process that you're talking about, it's something that we always push for.
Do you find that then the problem is evolved? It's not just rentability, but it's the fact that the rentability, and I hope I'm using that word appropriately, but the rentability of the applicant is it has so many different variables to consider that it can't be something that is a broad-based brush. Otherwise, you're going to miss opportunity. And so since the problem is something that requires those 10, 12, 13 different considerations, it simply isn't practical to have a broad-based brush, because you're going to cut yourself out of a big part of the pay zone in that market. And so if we can tune the rentability kind of like formula at the site level, or however you want to configure it, then I can have automation and allow the leasing agents to do their work of filling the building, and then the maintenance team to kind of keep the building filled. But then you've taken that burden of variability off the site team. They can focus on leasing things, and they put, and then renters, as they're applying, they can understand if they actually are suitable for this building or not, even though it may be something that is different, like you mentioned, a mile away, and maybe different parameters that need to be considered for that particular renter and that particular, rental. So that problem is something that is just too complicated to have a broad-based brush. So the problem evolves where it's like, hey, I've got, 20 units I'm in Austin right now, in the Austin area, 20 properties in the Austin area, and I'd like to have them full. Well, the problem is that I'm declining a lot of people that may not be able to, that don't pass our ratings, but our ratings are actually ineffective with respect to who we actually want to have in these buildings. And so I'm at a loss.
Yeah, which you don't want,
right?
So yeah,
which you don't.
One of the ways that we've addressed that, it's a pretty neat product that we launched early last year. It's so any portfolio, it could be at the property level, it could be at a regional level, it could be at the corporate level. Let's say they have, they've run X amount of applicants, and they see that there's maybe the decline rate has moved up to a point, it's moved up 5 points, and they want to manage that, right? They want to take some incremental risk, add in some additional. Yeah, they can move in, but they have to pay this an additional deposit. So we can take that exact group of folks that they've already processed, that have already returned a recommendation based on their criteria, rerun them with the new selection criteria that they're potentially going to move to, and then provide them what would be the outcome, right? And then if they want to do that, then it gets time stamped, and you be consistent from that point on. We can do that in real time, so that there's no guessing about where they could get lift and approvals, while at the same time minimize the amount of declines on the back end, depending on what their goals are, right? But again, being fair housing compliant, that's a really neat product. We launched that again early last year. We're getting great reviews from it, and it saves a huge amount of time, and it can help operators really drive that revenue that they're looking for.
I think what's especially important and kind of captures that, and I think this is one of the special things about this industry, is that there are different problems that occur for different categories and subsectors and regions, and there are different solutions that target those objectives of having a full building, but the blockers of having a full building are different, building to building, region to region, right? And obviously category to category. Like on the luxury side, they may not be part of your ICP. Of course, you take them as customers, but they're going to have a different problem they've got to manage in terms of keeping that building full. Very interesting. So when you take a look at the sense of urgency, when are they coming to talk to you? When have they said, hey, I want to have a chat with Rent Butter because this is now something that's a priority on my this quarter? How have they, what have they tried first?
Well, they may be using what I would refer to as legacy type models, which is they're getting standard credit, eviction, criminal data, rule of thumb, scoring. There's that, but again, there's some new products in the market today they may have looked at. If they're manufactured housing, they know our name because we've become a household name in manufactured housing. Just because we work with a lot of the large operators. They come to us typically for a number of reasons, and that's they see that fraud's rising, or they feel like they're missing data, right? They feel like that they're not getting adequate decisions, and they've also heard, you all provide some trending analysis, right? So what we're doing is we're all about validating through the source. So when an applicant, we spend a lot of time, Guillermo, really understanding the prospect journey, right? So what happens from the time the applicant comes in through, a lead, whether that be from an ILS or they come to the property, what happens at that point? How are they getting brought into the system, put into your property management software? What's the application experience like? Where are they paying the application fee? And then what happens after that? And then a lot of nuances around that. There's many more things. I'm trying to speed this up. We need to know all those things. What software are they using? We oftentimes asking these questions are like, well, nobody's really asked us that before. We have a proprietary CRM, and it's somewhat integrated into our PMS, but not really. We ultimately would like an integration with our CRM would be our ideal state, and then everything would flow more properly. So we're digging in like that so we can understand what is their ideal workflow. And then we can get there. We see a lot of these large operators that have very siloed processes. It's big operators that we all know, right? And for whatever reason, the fraud checks that they're doing, whether that be ID, PII validation, whatever that is completely siloed from their screening. And one may be integrated, both may be integrated, but differently. And they're having to, the staff's having to do different things, which creates additional time. So what we're really trying to do is help our operators streamline that process. And by really having the right discovery, a business discussion, trying to solve problems, that's what is the outcome that you're looking for. That's what we're really striving towards. And the sales team is really good at that. I think overall, broadly, when you look across organizations, that we want to solve problems and help our operators have the most efficient process. So that's what we're really focused on. But if they've come to us, they're either super curious about what we do because they've heard about us, or they have a problem that they'd like us to solve. But oftentimes it's, we're curious. We want to know what your product does. We don't know that we have a problem. So if you're asking the right questions, it's like, well, let's talk about, again, walk me through your selection criteria. And we go through that process and find out ultimately is that they're leaving opportunities at the door, or said another way, based on how they're screening today, you've got one renter who was approved, who was then later declined. And then you have another applicant that was declined that would have actually been a good renter. And we can show them that later through analysis that we do. Right. So it's those two lost opportunities is, could be, each of those is no less than $15,000. That's $30,000 hit on just two examples, right? So going through that process, understanding what they're looking for, if we can speed up sales velocity, if we can lower their bad debt, if we can get more approved applicants regardless of credit scores, if we dig into the why, then we usually we talk about this a lot. It's this new terminology, the cost of inaction. COI. So where we want to get to is the why, right? And the why is what we can solve for. And that cost of, if the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of change, then they're more likely to make. That's when we're going to see the outcome that we're looking for. But we're there to solve a problem, and ultimately that's speed, efficiency, and improved outcomes that win deals.
That cost of inaction is a funny one. I first heard that back in January with Mason Mello on the show, and he was talking about it.
Mason?
Mason?
From sure.
From sure, yeah. So small world, and he was talking about it, and I was
great
like,
by the way. Great sales guy.
Oh, he's a gem. It's gonna next time you chat with him, ask him about his dog. It's hilarious.
Okay.
But he, the thing that I articulate is, what's the worst thing that could happen with the status quo? What's the best thing that could happen if you commit to change? And we try and find actually a gap. Like, how wide is that gap? Because if the gap is narrow, there's typically not going to be a change. This deal's going to go out the side door. But if there is a significant gap between the best that could happen and the worst thing that could happen in the status quo, then you get some sort of momentum for change. And seeking that out is something that we're trying to measure all the time, because it's like, sure. Change is complicated. It's uncomfortable. There's risk in promoting it. And so if we just could stick to our jobs and have no change, that'd be a much better world to live in. But that's just not the world we live in anymore, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
That's not that option is not on the menu. And so you find a lot of people are just stuck. They're stuck. And she just was posting yesterday. I'm finding, I had this chat with Phil Burton a couple weeks back from Preferred Flooring, and we were talking about this Teddy Roosevelt quote, which is, and I'll ruin it, but it's basically complaining and not doing something about it is just whining. And there's a lot of people out there that are kind of just whining right now about not enough talent, bad quality, this, can't move fast enough. And then you offer a solution to them, and they're like, I can't do that. And so they just keep on whining. So I posted yesterday, and I think it's going to go up tomorrow or something like that. Just talking about hey, if you're complaining about quality, you're complaining about speed, but you're using these kind of tools. And like I said, in this post, like, it's not about the people anymore. It's about the tools you're asking them to use. Like, if you're asking your leasing team to use paper forms and you're complaining about quality, it isn't the people. If you completely cut them off at the knees of what they possibly could do. And so you take a look at all the different processes and you say, well, it's not the people. So now we're, acknowledging that technology is an amplifier, or, lack of technology is a
that's right,
a constraint, a constraining engine. So you can either choose to amplify the people that you have right now that are good, or you can choose to constrain the people that you have that are good. And guess what? If you constrain them, they're going to leave because they want to amplify their outcomes too. And so it's an interesting conversation from a technology perspective, because like folks there are less people to do the work, and the people that want to do the work, like they get it. We use this expression, get it, want it, and have the capacity. So get it, and want it, or binary. You have to get it and want it. But and then capacity, that's tools, and that's like management's job to amplify the get it and want it factor. And so if someone does get it and someone does want it, and then I give you paper forms to go deal with, then that's me. That's on me as a manager, as a leader. And if I'm going to complain about the inability to retain people because I'm giving them bad tools, that's, the cost of inaction is also a choice. It's not a deliberate choice, but the fact that you have decided to not do something needs to be acknowledged as being a decision. Because not doing something, not being aware of your circumstances, not getting out of the way of your people is a choice.
That's right.
And the cost of that choice can be your job, because it's going to catch up with you. And so it's an interesting, we had this conversation at NAA with a bunch of folks around like, what are your priorities, which is often how sales folks kind of like shape a conversation. And then, the next day the conversation was, well, what would get you fired? And it was very clear it was a priority then, right? And those kind of like framing of things helps really reveal what are the priorities of these people. Because like what you guys do, the priority may be, okay, I want to lease out this building. The priority may be, I want to make sure my leasing agents that are good get paid. The priority may be, I don't want to have a bad community. It may be, I don't want a bad debt expense. It may also be, I don't want evictions. Those are 6 competing priorities. That's right. So which one is it? And you ask the questions, and that's your point about discovery, right? And you find that out.
That's right. And good underwriting tools can help solve a number of those things if it's implemented correctly. I would add to that for sure. But these. So go ahead.
Go ahead. Keep going. Competing priorities.
I would say, competing priorities is it's something that we all face, right, in our work and our lives. The other side of that is, I'd be interested for your perspective, is if there's so much tech out there, and again, it's a good thing, but I've seen operators like implement tech too quickly and overload the team. They're trying to learn 2 or sometimes even 3 new softwares at the same time. That also can backfire, meaning there's no way that they can learn it that quick and be that efficient with it if it's getting implemented too fast and not very thoughtful. I'd be interested. Does that mean I've run into that?
Oh, it happens all the time. It happens all the time. Like, I think that like tech, it needs to be deployed with kind of a flywheel construct where you deploy, to a small user base, seek to get mini wins, and those mini wins build momentum for broader wins. But tech, I deployed tech for 20, 25 years. And so, and this is back in the Big Bang era. And let me tell you something, there's a lot of like blood, sweat, and tears when you go live. Like it's painful. And it's, I align it to like not going to the gym for like 15 years. And then all of a sudden doing like a full-on Pilates class or something, or running a marathon. Like you're just going to be destroyed for, you'll be destroyed for like 3-4 weeks. And then you'll be psychologically scarred around that change. So I think there's ample opportunity to bring in tech. I do think it has to be problem centric. Like if you're solving a problem for the people on the ground level, then you ultimately are going to get a faster buy-in. And so one of the things, around the question of a leasing agent, like they're the ones that are in contact with the renter, the prospect. Like they're the ones that have, what Rent does needs to be, presented in a way that helps enable them sell faster or close faster, helps them enable them achieve their goals and objectives. And so those kind of conversations, this is why I'm spending time in the field these days, is because like my imagination of the problem or corporate's imagination of the problem may be a different manifestation of what's actually happening on the site.
Sure.
And so talking to site people makes a big difference, because ultimately we need to get their buy-in.
That's right. Yeah.
Because the software is supposed to amplify people's roles versus
it should empower them, right? But
it should empower them.
I think more and more companies are starting to realize that it needs to be implemented in a very smart, thoughtful way, not overburden the team or teams, and let that product empower them to be successful. And then once they've got that down, they're comfortable with it. You're seeing the right responses in terms of how the software is working. It's being monetized appropriately, et cetera. Then you can look to implement something else. Change management of and by itself is a big thing. It's a big deal. And some people gravitate to it, others may not. So you have to grapple with both of those.
I mean, I think that there's, and I would also, the comment on, or the consistent comment from everybody is that there's too much tech out there. I do also think that is, that's a bit like whining, because like the tech that's out there is to fill gaps inside the existing process. And I had this conversation last night. A mature enterprise architecture is designed to have innovation come in and come out. It's not intended to be a monolithic structure that excludes or makes it hard to innovate, because innovation is going to occur at a faster pace than your kind of standard existing kind of known processes. Sure. And so if you've got an enterprise architecture that doesn't allow for innovation, you're going to find that innovation is just going to occur because people need to get their job done, and they'll have shadow IT and all those things as well. There's like 10 or 15 years of writing around this stuff. How CI knows get fired, right? Because they've blocked the business from becoming effective. And so I didn't answer the question, because I think that rather than complain about too much tech, there should just be acknowledged to plan for too much tech and just say that's what's going to happen. And so we need to create an enterprise architecture that enables that, and then be mindful of the fact that we're going to hire tech and we're going to fire tech, and that's just what happens.
Yep,
and
exactly.
Make it easy to do that.
Yeah, because it's educational consultative approach is the right approach too. I would agree, but just based on what you just said.
Yeah, but we got to get there, because we're not all there. There's a lot of fragments inside the market, and just kind of like I'll say the enterprise architecture. You look at a combination of what makes it different than other industries is like, you look at like 3M, right? One company, one ownership suite or set. So it's very easy to make decisions that way, or at least easier with respect to aligned interests. It doesn't work in this business, right? We've got owners, you've got managers, you've got providers, you've got residents, there's third parties, and all of this is, all these seats can change year by year. Like all of a sudden an owner decides to flip a building, well, then it's going to probably come with a new manager with it, or maybe they flip the manager. Like all that can happen, and so it's got to have some sort of malleability to it, so you can rip and replace like by design, and that's hard. Yeah. That's hard to absorb at the ground level, because you got this like building that may change owners, may change managers, but the people are very likely going to stay in that building working it, and they're going to have to learn and absorb new things. So it's like, you can complain about it, but it's just going to be what it is. That's the business. And so I don't know. I don't have an answer for it except for design for it, because it's going to happen. It's natural.
That's right. Design for it. But yeah, hearing the voice of your broader team as part of these decisions are made. I mean, I've just seen so many times when they're not, and I know it's challenging, but you have to have buy-in from your people to support the solutions that you're rolling out, right? And I think there's
clarity around the problem you're solving for them.
That's right. And I think if you have that buy-in and you've spent the time educating the team about why these changes are happening and what the impact will be on them, and let them have a say, at least respond, because they're going to have questions. It makes for, and that goes for our product, right? Is we tend to like, once the decision's been made, and we do a lot of bottom up and top down in terms of our marketing and outreach, a lot of the demos that we're doing, or with managers, a lot of the demos that we're doing, or with the executives. So yeah, we kind of hit, with what we do, we need to hit both. And that's worked out well for us. But in the same tone, you need to be, management companies, operators need to have that same philosophy. Is if they're going to roll something out, make sure that there's buy-in from their teams, and there's a way to do that allows them to have a voice. And sometimes their voice brings up points that are actually very, very valid that they might have not thought through, right? It's discussion is important. Communication's key.
Yep, and and especially when you're trying to like get your people to a hell yes situation, right? I mean, the adage, I cannot lose sight of the adage of you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's like so compelling in change management, is that you've got to make it so compelling for that audience, that team member, to follow change, which forces you to put yourself in the position and ask questions and be empathetic around their objectives and goals and the things that are getting in the way of that, so you can kind of orient the language to make it better for them. And that's not being tricky. That's like just getting on the side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's tricky. So
you guys are on the market, and often, you're going to see some objections along the way. What kind of objections do you get? I mean, obviously this sounds like a no-brainer for everybody, but not everyone's a no-brainer. What kind of objections do you hear?
Shoot, I'd say it's probably the same with what a lot of, prop tech companies face, which, for us, it would be, budget, cost, timing, change management, which we just talked about. One of the big ones is, the status quo, which that we have ways of dealing with that. And it's really about, look, we're not, if you're having those kind of conversations and you're pretty deep along and they've still got this kind of status quo, it's having the conversation around, look, we're not trying to change what's working. We're trying to upgrade how you make decisions. And if you can show that, if you can actually present that to them, and what we often do has worked really, really well, particularly for the more strategic deals, is prepare with your, with your champion, a one-page, well-written executive summary, and that is super concise. It helps guide that champion, him or her, in the conference room on the why their proposal is the solution that's the best choice. Defining, again, we're not going to be in the room, right? The salespeople aren't in the room. Those decisions are made in the conference, typically by a committee. But being able to define the why is super critical. The seller who wins is the one who best positions their champion to pitch your solution that succinctly captures the why. Whether that's, for us, it would be things like, time saved per lease, increase in approval of applicants, decrease in bad debt due to improved fraud and underwriting tools. And then in that same summary, it's like differentiate clearly, right? You're highlighting specific features and gaps, performance differences, unique capabilities the solution offers. You got to show ROI deltas, right? Here's what you're doing. Here's what we're proposing. Here's the lift, right? And again, that speaks to, status quo, but these are your lost opportunities. Keep what's working. We can be at parity there, but here's what you're not getting, and this is the impact. So executive summaries, I think, can really help with that. The huge implications for virtually every aspect of their business is, again, all around how they make decisions and being able to upgrade that. It's like what Warren Buffett has said famously, price is what you pay, value is what you get. And in my experience, if buyers aren't sold on the why, the defined outcomes, they're going to ignore the how. How does your product work?
When you there's so much, that's a whole other show, right? On aligning with that why and making that simpler, faster, easier. We've recently started adopting a tool that, in combination with GPT and recorded meetings, to help us make sure we have the right questions and gaps set up for the next meeting. So we're just not kind of repeating this all the time. Like, we're really coming along on a journey, and it's becoming incredibly valuable to identify gaps and good or bad deals, right? And I think what's interesting is that often, like, buyers, like, they'll stay along on a bad deal because they feel like an obligation, but like, it's okay to say, hey, by all indications, the data is indicating this isn't a priority for you. And sometimes they feel relieved saying it really isn't. You go, okay, well then that's okay.
That's huge, man. That is, but that, what, going through that process, what you just shared there, you'll eventually, that's your client. Because
they'll come around because they're going to say, well, you've given me.
Nobody's ever told me that.
Right. But it's interesting. Like, I don't think this is a good deal for us right now. And, I want to have conversations saying, and also the one thing that I'm bad at is they know when to stop selling, right? Like, one of our prospects, he's like, Guillermo, like, you're from the oil business. I said, yeah. He said, well, the oil business, once you hit oil, stop drilling.
Love it.
Okay.
Love it.
Good advice. Good advice. When you take a look at yourself, younger self, or maybe people that are joining Rent Butter, like, what's a piece of advice that you give people that you kind of stick by all the time? Your golden rule that you like to kind of like live by in the sales with respect to getting yes.
Okay, got it. So I'll answer that maybe this way. I learned probably early in my career that, of course, I always had high goals for myself in whatever sales job I took. It's like OT is OT, but I want to make X above OT. But if you're coming into an organization, you work for an organization, one of the first things that you should do is know your company's overarching OKRs for the year and for each quarter. And, for me, and I discuss this with the sales teams, it's like, like, hey, do you know the company's OKRs? Yes, some do, some don't, right? But where it's applicable, you need to anchor your own personal goals to those of the companies where it's applicable. And we all know most OKRs are pretty aggressive, right? Maybe even stretch goals, but they're there. And where it makes sense, because if you're aligned with the company's overarching goals, whether that be a piece of that is tied to your OTE, or you want to be focused on manufactured housing and how many units you want to capture there, whatever your OKRs are and how you're going to do it. I think that's a good practice. I talked to a lot of salespeople that, I ask them, do you know your company's OKRs? And it's like headlights. That's a miss. And sometimes maybe there's a communication gap, right? And if that's so, then that's a problem, right? The company should be very clear about what their OKRs are and assimilating that down through the teams. The other thing I would, always be learning and learn fast, because we're all moving fast. The industry's moving fast. There's a lot of new tech coming into space. So leveraging AI sales tools, I didn't have that luxury when I was carrying a suitcase every day. But where it's feasible, always be learning and leverage AI. And then lastly, I would say, the CRM is your friend, whether that's HubSpot, Salesforce, use it. Oftentimes I see salespeople that think of it as a chore, something they have to do. The good salespeople, the top tier salespeople, adopt the CRM as a sale tool because they know it's effective at managing their pipeline, the follow-up, which is so critical. It allows them to see where they are in terms of attainment to quota. So they tend to outperform. And that's, again, because they've adopted the CRM as a tool for their business. And then lastly, I would say, be consultative. Buyers are smart today. I mean, they're savvy. If you're just coming in, pitching, good luck. But if you're coming in as a consultant, trying to educate, trying to understand their problems, not being transactional, you're going to win deals, and you're going to be likable. They're going to trust you.
I think what's interesting about that consultative approach is that it applies in every single role. When you're going for a job, be consultative. Like, what are the goals of your leader? What are your goals? And that would align with your conversation around the OKRs, right? Like, if you understand the OKRs of the organization, you're going to find out the goals of your leader and align your personal goals to that. It's going to make it so much easier.
Yeah, that's right.
It's going to make it so much easier. Who should we talk to next?
Kerry Kirby would be one that I think very highly of him. He's the CEO and founder of 365 Connect. Their automated marketing and lead gen system. They win a lot of awards. Kerry's very active in his community. He's just a salt of the earth guy. I think a lot of him. He's a big philanthropist. And again, he's been in multifamily for many, many years. So he's somebody I trust, somebody I like, and he's got great tech.
I look forward to chatting with him. That sounds outstanding. Well, thank you everybody for listening today. Michael, thank you so much for the insights. I mean, really the stack of the why, know your OKRs, always be learning, CRM's your friend, be consultative. That's an outstanding take for anybody. And really to kind of align on maybe what you're doing today. So ask yourself, are you aligning your OKRs, even if they're not even if they are not communicated and translated to everybody? Maybe create your own OKRs and talk to your leader about them. Say, hey, is this aligned? And structure that conversation in such a way that you create an opportunity for alignment versus just waiting for alignment to happen to you. And I find people that take control over their careers are because they're seeking to figure out, how can I serve the people that I'm with my team, right? So create those conversations, create those opportunities. If you're listening on the podcast, if you're catching this on LinkedIn Live at a later date, add in some comments. Both Michael and I will get notified. I'm happy to jump in and offer some more feedback. If you're listening to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, hit follow and subscribe. That always helps people, make it easier for people to find us. And of course, there's new blogs and stuff that comes out later. Again, we always appreciate engagement with those things as we've kind of been to consolidate all this thinking that's coming through from this show and all the people get to chat with. So thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Outstanding conversation. Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. Thank you, sir.